view is the election of President Trump, where we all remember where we were and who we were with and what we were doing when we found that out, especially in the state of Michigan, where we voted for President Trump in 2016. For me, my last day at the Pentagon, because I was an Obama person, was his inauguration day, Trump's inauguration day. And I came home to Michigan to this farm and tried to figure out what my next step was going to be, since I was out of a job and had been in government all those years doing federal policy stuff. And I Googled local Democratic club for the first time. As someone who had worked for the government and national security, I had not done a ton of political work. And especially spending so many years abroad in a war zone, it's just, that's not what you're thinking about. I went to my first meeting. So a meeting, like, it was actually an Indivisible club that had popped up, if folks remember those, right after Trump won. And I started to think about running for the first time. And what I was reticent to get in because, as was mentioned, money in politics. I was running in a Republican district with a Republican incumbent. I did not understand the math of the money, and we have the worst campaign finance system you could possibly imagine. And so I was reticent until the spring of 2017, almost exactly to the day 6 years ago today. If you remember that first 6 months of Trump's, being in office, all he was talking about was repealing the ACA or Obamacare. He was talking about healthcare. We were having this debate as a country about healthcare, and what I particularly care about, protections for people with pre-existing conditions. That one is very personal to me because of my mom. My mom passed away in 2011 from ovarian cancer. And when she was diagnosed, she did not have health care. My parents divorced in the 80s. My mom actually came out as a gay woman and lived the rest of her life as a gay woman in suburban Detroit when it was, early 80s, mid 80s, we were not public about her being gay. For the rest of her life, she was responsible for her own insurance. And she had an early cancer when I was a little girl. She had breast cancer. So for the rest of her life, she had that pre-existing condition. And for many years, 5.5 years, unbeknownst to my brother and I, she did not have insurance, zero insurance. So no checkup, no gynecological exam, no one saying you had a very early breast cancer, you should probably have a hysterectomy. In 2008, we helped her get insurance. It was $1,000 a month and a $10,000 deductible. So her highest bill in suburban Detroit, higher than her rent. And in September of 2009, without us knowing, she let it lapse, paid another bill. In the summer of 2009, September of 2009, she walked into Henry Ford and was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So I know everyone in the room knows what it's like to have a loved one get a terminal diagnosis. I was in my early 30s, my first parent to get sick. It's like a grenade goes off in your life. And that same week and that same month that we were desperately trying to get her scheduled for surgery and tests and all that stuff was the same week and the same month that we filled out the paperwork for her to declare bankruptcy. So fast forward to 6 years ago, Trump is trying to repeal Obamacare, or the ACA, protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And actually the House of Representatives that I serve in now did repeal the ACA. The only reason we still have it is because one man walked across the Senate floor and voted against his party, right? John McCain. And I would hazard to say that there are few people left in the US Senate on that side of the aisle with that kind of bravery. But the House repealed it. They had a big old party on the White House lawn, like a rose garden ceremony. And I could see the man who I would ultimately run against just having the best day of his life, smiling, beaming, proud that he had voted to repeal protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And it broke me. And I said, no. We have a term for that kind of activity, voting against the interests of the people who elected you. In the military, it's called dereliction of duty. It's a fireable offense. Decided that day we were going to fire him. And in 2018, we fired him. And the reason why I was so happy to speak in front of the Benzie County Dems is because you know what it's like to be open-minded, progressive, thoughtful people in a red area, right? That is something that I know very well. I'm sitting in Holly. I'm in the most rural precinct in Holly. I never win my own precinct. We win the district, but not my own precinct. And so we know what it's like to feel like we're often alone, or we don't, we're in the minority of people who think that our country can be better, and it doesn't have to be as disturbed and as angry and as vitriolic as it is right now. I made a specialty out of this. This is how we won in 2018. I just don't have enough Dems in this district. It's a Republican-leaning district. Trump won it. I don't have enough Dems in this district to win just on base voters. I must win independents, open-minded people, swing voters. You all know them. Luckily, Michigan is a state that still has a lot of them. And that's my specialty, going into red areas and in that first tranche, losing better, right? Instead of getting 35% of the vote, I'll get 40% of the vote. And then building on that slight and losing better to demonstrate success that affects people's pocketbooks and their kids, and showing up and showing up and showing up over and over and over again. That's how we went in places like Brighton and Howell, where I lost them in 18, won them by a hair in 20, or won Brighton by a hair in 20, and then just won Brighton by 8 points in 2022. And I just won Howell, Michigan by 13 votes this last time. So, right? So you all know that there's no 50-point victory that we're going to have in a place like Benzie County, but it's about being informed about which communities, which precincts are right there on the margin, and then focusing our efforts on those areas, both as a field campaign, so knocking doors, making calls, texting people, being on their social media, being at their front door, but it's also about showing up and delivering. And I think Democrats have done we have a strong case to make. We have to make it in the right way, but we have a strong case to make about what we've done and what we continue to do in the state and across the country. So you all were probably just as shocked as I was when Senator Stabenow announced that she was not running. It's like an earthquake in Michigan politics. She has been representing some part of Michigan straight for 50 years, almost 50. So she's just an institution. I'm her congresswoman. I have like a version of her seat that she used to have in Congress. So we spend a lot of time together, and I didn't know. And so I had to take a serious look at, is this something that I want to run for? And at the end of the day, I decided that I wanted to do it. One, because I think there are some substantive things we need to do in the Senate to make this country work more efficiently. And number two, we need some stylistic changes, right? If I win, I will be the youngest Democratic woman in the Senate. I'll be one of the 5 youngest senators, period, in the country. And I am not a spring chicken, people. I'm 48. I'll be 48 if I win. I'm 46. So I think that the country can feel that it wants something different on the substance. 4 things that my campaign is focused on, and I hope they resonate with you all. One is we have got to focus policy and law on preserving and expanding the middle class. In a multiracial, multi-ethnic society, the way that we, succeed as a nation is by having a very strong middle class. It's gotten harder to get in and harder to stay in. And that's just a math thing, right? How much do you make, and what are your benefits worth? And then how much are you paying for your healthcare, your prescription drugs, all your big bills? And we always in this country should be a place where if you do well, your kids can do better. And that is to me a risk. I literally see it as a national security risk. Number 2 is making more things in America, preferably Michigan. We learned during COVID that it's fine if Rubik's Cubes or ladies' razors or something else are made in China. It is not okay when our economic security is connected and they have a veto on it with those 14-cent microchips, or with personal protective equipment for our nurses and doctors, or for things like pharmaceuticals, where, by the way, we make a very small amount of those in the United States. And then lastly, look, and you all know this better than anyone because of where you live. It is clear we are just going through something as a country, right? This is not normal. We all know that this is not normal. As someone who's a student of history and who has studied other countries for a living, I believe we are in the middle of a decade of political instability in the United States of America. A lot of countries have these. We've had them in our history. Not many of us living have remembered those, but we have had them. I get up every morning because I think we're about 6 years into that decade, right? When I think we're over the hump. That's how I wake up and do what I need to do. But as someone who was literally a trained pessimist, right? As a CIA officer, you are trained as a pessimist. I'm extremely optimistic that we are going to get through this decade of instability, because we've done it before, and it takes two things: engaged citizens and principled leaders. Literally in every instance in history, people say, no, we're not going to take what's going on. And then there are some decent people ready to receive the ball and leadership and do something about it. So I thank you for being engaged citizens. I thank you for being on a Saturday and for participating in a Saturday that shows how engaged you are. And I commit to do everything I can to be that principled leader that you deserve. So thanks for having me. Happy to take your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We got a couple questions in the chat, and I hope you can take a couple minutes to answer some questions in the room. If you're in the room to ask a question, why don't you just stand up and we will bring a microphone to you. That way people on the Zoom can see you better. I know they got a great shot of Mike Ross's shirt last time, so they didn't get. I know it was my fault, but I recognize the error of my ways. Thank you. So for the first question online, we got someone who was asking if you could comment on the security breach that just resulted in an arrest of a Massachusetts National Guardsman.
Yeah, so obviously we've had a lot of turning of events here where this young man now has been arrested in Massachusetts, a 21-year-old, for basically taking what looks to be his normal security clearance, that he had, a top secret clearance, and doing a lot of digging online and getting access to documents that probably he had no need to have, right? In the intelligence world, we say, not everybody has a need to know, even if you have a top secret clearance. And you often work next to people at the CIA who have access to different information than you have. And what's clear is that between the Pentagon and the intelligence community, they did not have a tight enough rein over people who might have a clearance and have passed all the tests, but don't have a need to know that sensitive information. And obviously, we don't know his motive right now. Printed them out, took some pictures. The minute I saw that they were pictures of the documents instead of the actual documents, I said, a camera's got a digital signature. He's got picture. You could see around the edges of the documents, you could see things like a desk. I mean, almost as soon as I saw it, I'm like, this guy, I think, is going to get caught. But now the Pentagon is scrambling to make sure, frankly, to cut off access for people who might have more than they should. The truth is, we had a call with the White House and the Pentagon for members of Congress on the Armed Services Committee, where I sit, and the intelligence community. And while the breaches are embarrassing and they're almost impossible to completely get rid of, a lot of the stuff in the documents were known to people in the national security world in both our country and our allies. It's just embarrassing for it to come out, right? And what we're now worried about, and the thing we're always worried about the most with leaks from my perspective, is Vladimir Putin will read that intelligence and will say, well, wait a minute, how'd they get that? How'd they get information on that phone call or that relationship? How'd they get that imagery? How'd they know all those things? And he'll start cutting off our sources and methods to get that information. And that can mean human beings. Right? A human being who is providing that sensitive information is now physically at risk because it's not hard to figure out sometimes where this stuff is coming from. So that's a real problem. Meaning we might not have the information again, and someone may literally lose their life. So breaches are never good. I'm very glad, and it's very clear to me they're going to make an example of this young man.
Thank you. Any questions in the room? We have another one. Steve.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you very much for being with us this morning, and it does my heart good because I'm a firm believer as a male that it's going to take females to get us out of the mess that the males have put the country into. My question to you this morning is, when you become our next U.S. Senator, will you do everything in your power to help us put an end to cannabis prohibition by removing it from the drug schedule completely?
Yes.
And by the way, my name is Reverend Stephen B. Thompson, and I'm the director of Benzie County Normal National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Well, thank you for being the first reverend I've ever talked to about marijuana. That's amazing. So yes, we've actually voted on this. It's definitely twice in 2 different Congresses that I've served in, if not 3 times. Which is because states like Michigan have made these substances legal. They should not still be I think it's called a tier 1 or a category 1 banned substance by the federal government. And the place where this affects the country, I think, the most is number.
What the hell?
Cece, you gave
Someone's
them to me as a
unmuted.
blanket yesterday. I set them on the couch and I just.
If it's any consolation, I cannot tell you how many Zooms I've been on where members of Congress, like 2 years into COVID, were still taking their Zoom cameras and phones like into the restroom, doing events from their bed where you can see them in bed. I've seen a member that I serve with in his boxers. So, whoever had like a half a minute of a hot mic about their blanket or whatever, that's nothing compared to what's going on in the US. So I would just say, lastly, on the marijuana thing, the crazy thing is that because it's still listed as one of these category 1 or tier 1 substances, the cannabis industry can't bank. They can't use federally backed banks. So actually the bill that we voted on is the Safe Banking Act. I'm a firm believer. So yes, you have my support when I get to vote on that in the Senate.
Thank you.
We've got another online question. Could you please elaborate on your worldwide view on international policies?
Oh, geez. Okay, just a small, quick question. So look, I think, and I'll be open about this because I know that there are different views, even among Democrats, right? As someone who served in war zones and who's been involved in international security policy for a long time, there are mistakes we have made as Americans abroad. There are mistakes our policy has made. There are foolhardy things that we've done. There's things that have set dangerous precedent. There are all kinds of negative things. But at the end of the day, I would always rather have a strong American leadership role in the world rather than ceding that to people like Putin or Xi Jinping in China. Right. And what I think is special about the United States and makes us different than those 2 countries who want to be superpowers, who want to be the global leader, clearly, is that we, in a democracy and in our culture, we reflect back on our mistakes and we try and do better. And that's very different than what Vladimir Putin is doing right now, or what Xi Jinping would do if he were the leading power in the world. So that's my overall frame. I've worked alongside the military my entire life, and I think that Democrats, frankly, can benefit from a bit more understanding of national security policy, of military policy, and making sure that we're always in a very bipartisan way supporting our veterans and those who choose to serve. In terms of how I see the world, look, we got really bogged down in the post 9/11 era in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And it sucked our attention into these big land wars in the Middle East. And in the meantime, people like Putin and Xi Jinping were like, great, they're distracted. Let's invest in our military. For Xi Jinping, let's really focus on denying American military strengths, and let's invest in special technology that can undermine American advantages. And now we're sort of past those land wars in the Middle East, and we're making up for that time. And great power competition is back. And that's why it is so crazy to me that there are people in this country who have this like openly pro-Putin stance. Right. And it's like, do they remember the Cold War? Like, these are not good folks. So that's a very broad brush, just so we can get through some other questions. But that's how I look at national security across the world.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Two more questions, all right? Mike?
Good morning. When you are elected, do you anticipate voting to abolish the filibuster in the Senate? And do you support efforts to expand the Supreme Court to break the radical rights monopoly on our lives?
Great questions. So let me take them separately, since they're on two different issues. So, I think as someone who was not in politics, if you would have asked me 7 years ago, where are you on the filibuster? Right, and just so we're all level set, the filibuster is the rule, and it's a rule, it's not a law, but a rule that any bill that comes to the Senate needs 60 votes before it can even come to the floor of the Senate for an up or down vote. So you don't need 60 votes to pass a bill. You need 60 votes just to bring it to the floor. And then you need a simple majority, 51, in order to pass a bill into a law. So I think if you would have asked me from the outside 6-7 years ago, I would have said, look, that seems reasonable. We want policy that endures, that is, flexible, so that, it doesn't just, we make one law and then the next Congress or next Senate, we flip it and we're constantly pendulum swinging between. But the truth is, at this point, especially as a congressional legislator, we have passed hundreds, probably thousands of bills that just sit and die on the vine in the US Senate. And while for some of them, that might be okay, I'll tell you what's not okay. Voting rights. I mean, literally an update of the late 60s Voting Rights Act cannot get an up or down vote in the US Senate. So many things around a woman's right to choose, so many things around gay rights, so many things around civil rights that cannot, or campaign finance reform. And I'm not saying we're going to win all those votes if they got to the floor. The truth is, we probably wouldn't win all of them as Democrats, but I believe in an up or down vote, and for making people put their money where their mouth is and show how they would vote on voting rights. I want to know which Republicans aren't going to vote for basically an updated version of a 1960s Voting Rights Act. I would like them to be on record on that. So I am for getting rid of the filibuster as it exists. And I think, if people want to do kind of the old timey talking filibuster, Nancy Pelosi did this, like 19 hours straight talking while people try to negotiate and get more votes. I don't have a problem with that, but not allowing us to vote on fundamental issues of democracy, I just don't think works. And I'm sorry, I have lost faith that if the Senate flipped in 2 years and went to the Republicans, does anyone believe that they would maintain the filibuster if they had a 51-49 advantage? I've lost faith on that. So that's my views on the filibuster. On expanding the Supreme Court, look, I will tell you that at my heart, I am a pragmatist. I believe in getting real points on the board in order to move an issue forward and to help people. And while I think there's lots of interesting ideas about the Supreme Court, including expanding the court, What I just don't think that is in the zone of possible anytime soon. And so for me personally, I'm willing to hear analysis of it. I'm willing to understand it. But if you're going to ask me is that going to be my number one thing I'm going to push for in the Senate? No, because I got stuff to do that I can do. And I think on the Supreme Court in particular, that's one where if you want to get rid of the filibuster and then you go and expand the Supreme Court, you better believe that the next time the Republicans flip the Senate, which is easy to do at such a close margin, that they're going to shrink the court and then expand, and we're going to expand. And that, to me, you start to break down the institution. So I'm always willing to hear. I will hear from anyone who's got a logical argument about an issue, even if I don't agree. But it's just not going to be where I'm going to put a ton of my own effort.
Thank you. Okay, so for our final question, it's from the chat, and the person wants to thank you for your great job as a rep from Michigan, but also wants to know if you have a plan for how to reassure the farming community in Michigan as Senator Stabenow's successor. I would think with your background, you definitely have a lot of really good ideas. So that's the question.
Great question. So this one is one of those weird coincidences in life that you can't design, but ends up working out. So just like every congressperson in the state of Michigan, our districts were redrawn, right? And after the census, we had our wonderful nonpartisan Citizens Commission that redrew our maps, which is why we have the Michigan House and Senate. I mean, we did amazing work to really change the course of our state. And we're seeing the benefits of that in the first 100 days of legislation down in Lansing. But what it also did for me was majorly expand the physical distance, the physical space of my district, and made it much more rural with a much higher percentage of farmers. So even before I knew about Senator Stabenow, I was working and hustling to get on the House Agriculture Committee. And I am one of the newest members to the House Ag Committee. We don't have any Michigander besides me, Democrat or Republican, who's on the House side, because Senator Stabenow is like the queen of ag on the Senate side, right? She's the chairwoman. This year is a farm bill year. So for those who are farmers or no farmers, this is the once every 5-year bill where we actually make policy and do appropriations for farms, for conservation, and for food security, things like SNAP and food stamps. So this is a good year to be on the Ag Committee and to be writing that bill, because we're actually going to legislate, and one way or another, we got to get that done. So this is first of all, great opportunity for me to learn the issues, get tutored by the expert, by the queen of agriculture, and to connect that to the people I represent, because I'm every day, I mean, even this past week, we had a big forum with farmers to hear from them on their priorities on the farm bill. We had a huge forum with all the food security people, the pantries, the food kitchens, all the folks who feed our kids and our folks who need that safety net. So I'm in my class teaching me how to understand some of the policy issues. And then I just represent a ton of farmers. So it's a great question. And to me, it's fundamental to understanding this state. And I don't believe we have to have some, Democrats tend to be like, we either like farmers or we like environmentalists. The Farm Bill is the place where we meter all that out. And I just don't believe the world lives in that black and white, pendulum. We can get to good solutions if people actually are there to work. So that's what we're going to do. And it's a great question. And just so you all know, since you're around a lot of farmers in a rural community, Senator Stabenow has officially changed the talking point on Michigan ag. For years, the talking point was Michigan has the second most diverse agricultural state in the country after California. But we have changed the talking point, and the talking point is we are the most diverse agricultural state in the country. Wait for it. The most diverse in the country with access to water. So I thought that was brilliant. So it was a great question, and I'm looking forward to getting smart and continuing that strong engagement with our rural farmers.
Thank you so much. And thank you for spending time with us. And we hope that you come and see us in person. We've got a lot more questions. You've got a lot of eager people who want to see you and chat with you more. And I think you've heard our cherry pie up here is absolutely wonderful. So please let us know if you're in the area, and we would love to see you. But so thank you so much for your time.
Of course, I'll be up this summer, so we'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Okay, we're almost ready to move to our next very special guest, but we're wondering, is Olivia Bailey in the house?
Give her money, right?
Olivia Bailey? Okay, well, we'll move right along then. Fine, great. Okay, so listen, folks, it's not that long ago that a van full of Benzie Dems were driving their way through the great ice storm of March 2018 to Detroit, intent on helping to make sure that the Michigan Democratic Party nominated Dana Nessel for Attorney General. Steve was in that van, and no, wait a minute, not yet. Yeah, that's okay. Hold it on, hold the curtain, as they say. So anyway, they succeeded along with a bunch of other people, and the rest is history. We now have Attorney General Nessel. She's proven to be a very aggressive, highly motivated Attorney General. She works on all sorts of issues important to people, not just to big companies or large donors. She works on hate crimes, elder abuse, PFAS contamination, opioid trafficking, fake electors, fake arguments from Enbridge, all kinds of things like that. So we'll let the Attorney General fill us in on those and other incredibly challenging legal issues she constantly wrestles with. Then she'll take a few questions before we adjourn, and then hang out a bit with her here at headquarters for a little bit. She's been waiting patiently in the lobby. We haven't been able to get some coffee to her yet, but we will very soon. So it is my honor to let Steve introduce the Attorney General, and then when he does, you can come up and sit here, okay?
The blind man. It is truly my honor and my privilege to present to everyone my friend, who I look upon as a daughter, the people's lawyer, and our amazing Wonder Woman State Attorney General of Michigan, Dana Nessel.
Gosh, what amazing several introductions for me. So are you guys the ones that turned Benzie blue? Is that you guys? Okay, so I do want to see that. Oh, I have to go over here. You can't see me. Oh, sorry. All right. I will sit. Yeah, I will say though that while we did flip, I did win Grand Traverse and I did win Leelanau. I actually tied in Benzie. I don't know if you know this. And so I want to know, who is that one person that didn't come out to vote that day, or who voted against me? No, as I've been told many times, tying Benzie is winning Benzie when you're a Democrat. So anyway, it is really great to be here. As you know, Benzie might be one of our smallest counties in the state, but to me, it's still one of the most important. And I get here as much as I can. I was just saying I'm gonna be back here for the 4th of July, hopefully to march with all of you guys in the 4th of July parade. We are doing so many exciting things in Lansing right now, but I have to say that I brought with me today one of Lansing's most exciting new freshman representatives, Betsy Kofia. And for those of you here some of you might be represented by her, but all of you know her and have supported her. And let me tell you this, and I think it's one of those things where it's maybe it's not abundantly clear to people who are sort of outside the Lansing Beltway, but none of the progress that we have made since January happens if Betsy gets a flat tire. I mean, it's true. It's just true. She's what keeps us in the majority. And without you guys having worked as hard as you did to send her to Lansing, all the great things that I know so many people are excited that we finally got done, whether you're talking about, repealing the retirement tax, whether you're talking about our expansion of Elliott Larson, or our At Long Last, or some of our really important gun safety measures that are going to protect kids in school. There are a million other things. I mean, it's because Betsy is in Lansing. And so one of the things that I'm doing up here beyond talking about the work that we're doing in my department is also, making sure people understand the importance of her being there. And I know just since I've been up here, I mean, some of the things we've done and talked about, we were in Traverse City talking about how we're going to be revising and expanding the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act to make sure that there's more transparency in government. She is a key part of our Elder Abuse Task Force initiative and all of our new bills that involve ensuring that we don't have abusive guardianships and conservatorships, and that we are making certain that we have the right tools in place to better protect seniors and other vulnerable adults. We were already talking about some of the things that we're going to do to expand the Consumer Protection Act to make sure that we can go after companies like pharmaceutical companies when they're price gouging people on things like insulin and other life-saving narcotics and drugs. And the thing is this, I have spent the last, 4 years in office basically fighting against a Republican legislature who makes every effort every year to try to really defund my office so that even initiatives that seem really, really simple, that everybody should want, that they're not disassembled because of that. And now because we have majorities in both the House and Senate, I can work with them in order to enhance protections for people around the state instead of fighting them as they are trying to take those protections away and trying to stop me from protecting people around the state. But also, what's so amazing is we work with the legislature now every single day to try to, format really the best new laws so that, firstly, we're working together to make sure that those laws are going to accomplish the things that we want them to accomplish, because turns out like drafting laws is hard. One word here, one word there, and it doesn't accomplish the thing that you were trying to do in the first place. You have to be very careful. And secondly, we know that, these laws are going to be attacked in the court system. And so it's a matter of working with the legislature to make sure that we have the best possible language in there so that when we get sued and when they try to overturn these laws, I can go into court and make sure that they are properly defended and upheld so that for hopefully generations, we have these laws on the books and not just temporarily. So that's some of the stuff that we've been doing together. So thank you to all of you who helped send Betsy to Lansing. It's been a godsend, and I do want to let you know that I am going to be up here a lot. And one of the things I'm going to be doing is trying to use my leadership PAC to try to raise as much money as I can to keep Betsy in Lansing. And again, I don't know that we can emphasize this enough. Just her seat. We lose her seat, we don't have the majority anymore. We don't get any new laws passed. That's how close it is. We had a guy, I think some of you know, who, no pressure, but I mean, we had a young man from the west side of the state, Representative Joey Adams. he had the audacity to have a baby. His wife was in the hospital giving birth to their child, and he got called to come back to Lansing for a vote. And as the baby was born, he held the baby, he got in the car, and he drove to Lansing, which was a 2.5-hour drive, I think, for him, just because there was an essential vote going on. And without him there, wasn't going to pass. So that's, so we're doing great things. And of course, I want to talk about all the great stuff that's going on. But also, I think it's important to recognize, yes, Michigan is headed in the right direction. And yes, we're doing all kinds of great things. But we have a situation where that could change at any time. And I do want to make people aware of this. This is an exciting and happy event, but I think people should really just understand, where we're at in this situation. We have 2 Democrats in the state house that are actually running to be local mayors of their towns. And that's, of course, in November. If they win, both of them, suddenly we're in the minority again. And we're going to have special elections to fill those seats. But, even one of them wins. Now it's a tie. And we have to have co-speakers, and they have to, change all the committees, and all of this great legislation that we have moving forward comes to a standstill. So, it's really good news. We're doing great things, and we're going to continue to do that and move as quickly as possible. But when you talk about not being able, I know everybody wants to be able to say whoo, we worked so hard and everything worked out great. And now I'm just going to watch 90 Day Fiance all day, every day. Which, as you know, is my favorite show. It airs Sunday night on the TLC's channel at 10 p.m. I don't work for TLC. I don't get any funding of any kind from TLC. It's just an amazing show. But with that, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And the prize is having majorities in both the House and the Senate, which, of course, we're going to have, thankfully, until 2026. And, of course, you guys reelected all of the executives. And we have a Democratic majority on the Michigan Supreme Court. So all in all, pretty amazing. But so just, because I know, we don't have a whole bunch of time, although I'm going to stay and talk to whoever wants to talk afterwards. But just some of the things beyond the fact that we are spending all of this time working with the legislature and trying to craft, new and better laws. And most of the stuff that you've seen that has passed, that has moved through, our office has been involved in some way, shape, or form. And we work with the governor's office, of course, doing that as well. But in addition, we have some of the major initiatives that I started in my first term. As you know, we've gotten some enormous payouts due to the fact that I promised you all that I would go after the opioid manufacturers and distributors, which my predecessor had refused to do, and I did. And we've already brought into the state over $800 million, but we have some new settlements that are coming in soon. So it's very, very shortly going to be over $1 billion. My hope is that by the time I'm done with these lawsuits, it's closer to about $1.5 billion that we've brought in. And what I decided to do was, and this was before we flipped the legislature, the way that I structured the settlement, I just didn't trust that the Republican House and Senate would get that money out into the communities that needed it the most. So I did a 50-50 split. And what we did is half the money went directly to the counties and the cities and municipalities, the subdivisions. The other half went to the state to be distributed through the Department of Health and Human Services. And so that process has begun. So, Benzie County has already received their first payment, and you're going to get another payment every single year for many years. And again, that's just the one settlement. There's several others that are coming. And I truly hope we're going to see more resources available, because as you know, the opioid, epidemic has not ended. How many people here know somebody who has an opioid related issue, or even who has died from an overdose? Probably everyone, quite honestly. So we're continuing to tackle that issue, and to tackle it in a meaningful way that involves people getting treatment instead of going to jail or prison. We have a lot of other great programs I'm excited about. How many people saw what happened on April 11th with our automatic expungement program? I don't know if anybody had any possession of marijuana convictions from a long time ago that got removed from their record. But in a single day, we had, hundreds of thousands of people that had very old convictions removed. Why is that important? Because for people, there have been people who've been crime-free for years, for decades, that were always held back by those convictions and not able to move on and get new employment, find a place to live, even get student loans to go back to school, get certain professional licenses. I mean, the list goes on and on. For people who got an expungement, within 1 year, statistically, their salary is going to be raised, or their wages will go up 22% on average. And they're far less likely to engage in criminal conduct in the future. So it's really just a win-win-win. So we're very excited about that program. Our new Job Court program just started. It's a pilot program. It starts in 3 counties this year: Marquette, Genesee, and Wayne. And it's a criminal diversion program where people who are in the criminal justice system, if they have a low-level non-assaultive felony, they get diverted into a program that involves not just job training and not just placement into a good-paying job with benefits, but also they get wraparound services. So for traditional barriers to steady employment, transportation, we help you with that. Childcare, we help you with that. Housing, we help you with that. All right, do you have some substance abuse issues, mental health issues? We help you with that. And our goal is for each and every one of the participants, we think that all of these folks are going to go on and have successful lives and careers, and frankly, that never see them in a criminal courthouse, we hope, ever again. So that's a program that we're really excited about. Thank you. And as you mentioned, we filed cases against over a dozen PFAS manufacturers, and also some specific companies that were polluting the environment. And we've already seen some success. We just settled the case, for instance, in Livingston County against a major polluter there, and they are paying 100% of the cost of the cleanup. 100%. Plus that company has to pay for all of the state testing. So it's not just that they're paying for the cleanup, but for all the testing as well. And that is our hope, that we're going to continue to be able to do that with all of these cases around the state. It's a simple premise, and I talked to you about it many times when I've met with everybody before. You made the mess, now you clean it up. Just very, very simple. And we just have so many other programs, but since I'm here, I'd love to take questions that you guys have about the work that we're doing. So, and we have some on the chat too. So. All right.
Here's one for you, Betsy. So when you were at our house last summer and we talked about the opioid problem, myself and Deb Frisbee have started a group in Benzie and Manistee counties to try to create a program where we're getting money or from the opioid settlement or from DHHS to increase the benefits for children that are in guardianships and that sort of thing. There's 10,000 in foster care, but there's 54,000 in kinship care. So this report is an old report, but it talks about the effects with children. And so my own premise is with my daughter, she's been in rehab 4 or 5 times, and heroin is a really hard addiction to overcome. I'm wondering what's happening with those kids that are not getting services that have suffered trauma. I want you to go after the pharmaceutical companies on behalf of the children of Michigan, because those children are not getting served. And as a grandparent, my kids are now on their way. I am really tired of seeing the children overlooked. And I think it's a way that you can bring more money into the state to help specifically the children.
Yeah, that is a really good point that you make. And here's what, first of all, our lawsuits against the manufacturers and the distributors involve all Michigan residents who have suffered. And of course, the children, of course, oftentimes the very, well, obviously our most vulnerable victims for what happens when their parents suffer addictions and can no longer care for them as a result of it. So I'll be honest with you, here's the biggest challenge that we're having at the state level, and then it filters down to all communities. And it's this, we don't have, even if we had $1 bazillion, I know that's not a real figure, but even if we had more money than you can imagine, right now we have a real issue when it comes to the number of child welfare workers. And so social workers, therapists, psychologists, we don't have the beds for kids who themselves are experiencing mental health breakdowns, oftentimes because of the reasons that you're talking about right now. And so, and I hope that, maybe, Representative Kofia can speak to this a little bit, but to me, one of the focal points of uses of this money, and I have made it clear, by the way, to the legislature, and I've made it clear to the governor's office, this is an appropriate use of this money for us to work on the mental health component to make sure that we are doing everything we can to attract people into these professions. Because what we are finding time and time again, and you might have seen this as a big problem downstate in Wayne County, you have all these juveniles that are in the criminal justice system. Some of them actually haven't committed any crimes. They're just people who, are having horrific mental health breakdowns, and there aren't the beds in treatment facilities to send them to. And one of the big problems that we had, and this was early in my term, the state had to shut down some of those facilities because we had facilities where kids were sent and there was an improper use of restraints. And in some cases, very, very sadly, children died in those facilities. So I was like, well, we can't have that. So we shut those facilities down. You understand that we had to. It wasn't safe for the kids. But then, with just the drainage of the number of workers that we had in these positions, workers who I think you'll all agree with me, it costs a whole lot for them to get their education, and then they don't get paid nearly as much money as they should. And so there was burnout during COVID, and so many people left the field. And like the saddest thing for me is to hear of somebody who is, a social worker who works with children say, I left and now I'm working, I'm a shipped representative. I go out and I grocery shop for people and I make the same amount of money doing it. I mean, we can't have that anymore. And I think working with the legislature, there are all kinds of ways that I can think of to use the opioid funds and many other funds to incentivize people, and whether this is student loan relief for people, which I think would be a good idea, or if it's what we do sort of with police officers in the academy, where we say, we're going to pay for your education, but the trade-off you make is you're going to come work for the state, or you're going to work for, the community, you're going to work for a municipality, whatever it is, or a nonprofit. But we really need you in these positions. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge that we're having. There's absolutely the understanding that children, not just the children of those who have opioid use disorder, not just them, but so many other kids have mental health issues right now, worse than ever. We just don't have the people to treat them. And I will tell you right now, I got, 2 kids in college, and one of them, the one I think is best situated, there's not a day that goes by that I'm like, hey, here's what I think you ought to do for a living, because you'd be good at it, and because there's such a need. And he's getting a degree in it, and I'm gonna be so proud whenever he graduates and goes on hopefully to graduate school to get some specialty training in it. But we need to be doing that with as many young people as possible. And for the people who are in that field right now, we need to encourage them to stay and do everything we can to retain them. So are they getting some of that money? Well, I know that that DHHS, we've made it clear to them that that is an appropriate use of that money. And I don't know if Betsy can speak further as to any of the appropriations that were made in regard to this. Do you mind if we ask her, because she appropriates the money? I just try to sue and then bring it in.
I'll try to keep it short, Jim. So, hello, everyone. Consider this a cameo appearance. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make it, but I was really pleased that the AG invited me to swing by. So thank you, and thank you for having me. So long story short, these are ongoing conversations. The budget process is underway. We hold the gavels in both the House and the Senate now. So we are managing our budget process. The discussion about where the opioid settlement money goes is ongoing, and I am part of that, and I agree. I think that money does need to be steered towards the most impacted, the children of impacted adults, as well as the often kin who are now taking care of those kids, often with little to no resources from the state. It's over 50,000 individuals in the state of Michigan. There's deep issues with lack of resources for kinship care now. And as Deb, you might attest, in my family's children and seniors just this past week, I brought that up with the DHHS acting director, Sterling, the fact that we have so many families that are not receiving the support that they need to be there for these kids. All the research shows that it's better for these kids to stay with family, extended family. Their odds are better to be able to come through that trauma. But if the families are struggling and don't have the resources they need, including mental health support, that much lessens the possibility of success. So long story short, very much a part of the conversation. We hold the gavels now. We need to do a much better job on this issue.
Yeah. And I mean, the important thing, for me is, I'm the one in the state that has the ability to do clawbacks if the money's not used appropriately. And again, I have said this is absolutely not just an appropriate use of the money, but an essential use of that money.
Okay, we've got one question from the chat. Can you please talk about the possibility of getting good time for prisoners working again?
Yeah, so this is an important conversation to have, but I'm going to be very honest and clear with you, as I always try to be, about my opinion. It's not the same as all the other, Democrats have different perspectives on this. Here's my view, and I say this as having been a very long time prosecutor. I prosecuted child abuse cases and sexual assault cases and domestic and child homicides and many other kinds of very serious cases. What I don't like about good time is that for a victim of a crime, they have no idea how long a person is going to be in the Michigan Department of Corrections. So to be honest with you, I call good time the Lying to Victims Act. And here's why. Now, I argued a case, not on behalf of the Department of Attorney General, on behalf of the defendant that was suing the Department of Attorney General. I'm allowed to do that from time to time, and I can build a conflict wall, and I can argue against my own department for a defendant on a case. And this was I believe in 2019, the People v. Warren, where you had an individual who had two operating while intoxicated convictions and was not told by the court that those cases could run not concurrent at the same time, but consecutive to one another. And the law, as it was interpreted at that time, was that you didn't have to tell the defendant that he could get twice as much time. So I argued against my own department, and I said, that's not right. We don't lie to people in court. And if you say the most you can get is 5 years, that means the most you can get is 5 years. If it's 10 years, then you say 10 years. And that's what a person deserves to know when they're pleading guilty or they're convicted of a crime. Well, I feel the same way about being a victim of crime. And if somebody tells you, if the judge says, I am sentencing this person to 5 to 15 years, meaning at least 5, but it could be as much as 15, then that should mean 5 to 15 years. And when we allow for good time, and remember, I was a prosecutor before we had the Truth in Sentencing Act. What would happen all the time is I would say to a rape victim, for instance, are you okay with us pleading this with a sentence agreement of 5 to 15 years? And they would say, you know what? That's fine, because I think 5 years is enough time for me to know that this person is getting the punishment I think they deserve, but it's also enough time for me to get my life together. So for me to go to therapy, for me to move, we have now, thankfully, we have something called the confidentiality, address of confidentiality program running through my office, so that people can't be as easily found for when someone, say, gets, an abuser, can't locate where they are on the internet, because everything runs through the state, instead of being able to just look up, where does this person live. But for all the reasons that a crime victim needs to know that, what happens with good time is, if a person becomes eligible for good time, then that means it could be, maybe they're serving really 4 years, maybe it's 3 years. Nobody knows how much time they're going to do, and the court is not allowed to say to the victim, by the way, this could end up being less than 5 years. They're not allowed to say it, and they're not even allowed to consider it during sentencing. So to me, what we should do instead, and there's a bill that's moving forward on this, is to reconsider our sentencing guidelines, which, by the way, are not mandatory, you should know. They're only discretionary. So a judge can go below or above them if he or she do so. But to me, if we think that some guidelines are just too high and are not really appropriate for the crime that's been committed, then we ought to reevaluate the guidelines. But we shouldn't be lying to victims about how much time a person is going to do. It's not right to do that to people. And in the meantime, we do have great, people say, well, this gets people an incentive to get out earlier. Well, we have minimum and the mandatory minimum and then maximum sentences. So the incentive should be, you get paroled at your minimum and you get out at 5 instead of the 15. But first of all, victims have to go back to the parole board year after year after year. And like everybody else, victims move around. You can't always find them. So we had this horrible case that involved the most horrific case where the person didn't end up being murdered, thankfully, but a torture and rape case of a person who had a sentence that, I think it was 15 to 30 or something around that. And the victim could not make it to the parole board, which she had done just about every year, because she had been in a car accident and she was in the hospital. She couldn't tell the parole board that she couldn't make it. And so, you know what they did? The parole board paroled them. And she was terrified because she was afraid that he was going to find her. Our office intervened and fortunately got the parole board to reconsider. But my point is, there are two sides of this that we have to consider. Now, the number of people who are incarcerated is at the lowest level it's been since I've been practicing law. And I don't want to say it's been cut in half, but it's been reduced by at least 30%, maybe even more than that. So fewer people are getting prison sentences now, because we are looking at, we look differently at diversionary programs and rehabilitation programs and all the rest of it. So for most people, if you're getting an MDOC sentence, lots of times you did something very harmful to someone, or it's not your first time or second time or third time or fourth time or fifth time that you've been charged with an offense. But, I am a big fan of programming like we have in Vocational Village, for instance, in the MDOC. Well, while you're there, you're getting a trade, you're getting a skill, you're getting educated. And what we do now is work towards making sure that people have all the tools they need, whether it's an ID, whether it's their social security card, and then to help them get job placement and housing when they are re-entering into society. But I don't believe in lying to victims. And I know that's going to be controversial. Not all Democrats are going to agree with me, but that's my position, and those are the reasons why.
Okay, well, you go into the room then. I can talk later. I'm going to talk about it. Stuart's got a question. Yeah. I did just want to let you know that Olivia Bailey's mom, she's our daughter's best friend, and she's in the room now. So afterwards, if you want to.
Thank you.
And what is her name? Jan Crossman. Thank you.
So could you move over in front of the camera someplace that you're completely
Stand in front of me.
Stand in front of Mike.
Under the same thing, when you were talking about
Like
environmental,
this.
when you're talking about environmental, you said that that company down south had to pay for everything. The same thing with opioids. I had asked you a question before. There's the Sackler family, Purdue. They were going to get 800 million, far short where it should be. Are you taking that same approach? What's our cost for opioid for all of these programs for the state? Do you know what that is? And those companies should be there, is my point, I guess. Are you taking that into consideration?
Well, first of all, so we are sort of on the board of the states that have been making the decisions on the Purdue Pharma case. Unfortunately, they filed for bankruptcy. So it's been very hard because we have to go through bankruptcy court. Although we still believe that we're going to get a settlement from them. The Sacklers, who are, I think I could say, garbage. I would say garbage humans, but I'm not sure about the second part of that. You know, we're really clever about transferring money, and we have spent years now trying to track down the money in Europe mostly, and because it was disseminated all over the place and very, very hard to track down. You know, but what we have done is, it's the calculation that we've made is this. First of all, we look at the number of people in a state, and it's funny because a lot of the fights that the state AGs have had, lots of times, yeah, it's the Democrats versus the Republicans. Like, for instance, this latest, you know, mifepristone issue with Medicaid abortion, medical abortion. I'm sorry, prescription medication abortion. But in the case of opioids, it wasn't the Democrats versus the Republicans. It was the larger states versus the smaller states, and a lot of it was, you know, the Delawares and Rhode Islands being like, how come we're not getting all this money? It's like, because no one lives in your state. Like, I'm sorry, like, I don't even know, do you guys know anybody from Rhode Island? Because I've never met anyone from Rhode Island. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it might not exist. I'm not 100%. I mean, I've studied it in school, it's on the map, I just don't know anybody who lives there. But my point is that we looked at the population of the state, but we also did it from a formula where we looked at how badly the state was impacted. And as a result, we were able to get more in Michigan than other similarly populated states because of the impact here. Here's one of the struggles that we need to talk about, and this involves our lawsuits that are, I think they're going to end up being successful against, for instance, some of the distributors, Walgreens and CVS and places like that. You know, yes, they played a major role, in my opinion. They knew how many pills were going out into communities, and it was like, you know, thousands of pills for every man, woman, and child in certain communities. The problem was in some instances is you would have a rural community where literally there's one Walgreens and that's it. And the very real threat that, depending on how far we went in terms of a settlement or a trial, would they be closing down that one Walgreens? And then where are people going to go to get their prescriptions? And so it was doing in large part a very deep dive into the financials of some of these companies and wanting to sort of hit that sweet spot where we were getting as much money as we possibly could from those companies for the damage that they did to our communities, without removing, you know, a place where people really have to go to get their prescriptions. And so there is a little bit of a balance that we had to look at in terms of that. And believe me, they didn't just say, oh, we're going to shut down all the stores and be like, okay, well then never mind. I mean, we're talking about really going into their financials to find out, you know, what could they, quote unquote, afford, and what was going to cause them to shut down too many pharmacies in the state that would create real significant problems for people getting their medication. But the Purdue Pharma case is ongoing. It's still going through bankruptcy. I could talk for an hour just about that, but just know we haven't given up on that. And we are going to get money out of that. It's just taking more time than I wish.
All of them.
Right. Well,
They created it.
yeah.
They should take
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for those great answers to those great questions. We're going to end the Q&A part of this, and in a minute, we're going to stop the Zoom, and Madam AG will stick around and have some coffee and whatever with folks there. We got some great treats. But before we, if there's anything left, but before we do that, I believe that we have Olivia online now, her mother, who wants to talk about the scholarship for just a second, okay? Go ahead, take it away.
Hello, thank you for giving me a moment to speak on Olivia's behalf. I can't stress enough the importance of scholarships for our local students. Olivia has almost completed her first year at Northwestern University. It has been a tough year, but she's settling in well, doing a lot of great things, staying true to her volunteerism. She's joined the Native American Student Alliance and is a board member on the philanthropy group at her dorm, and is just doing a lot of great things. So I appreciate it. And if I can say one thing, she's had a very tough week. There was a shooting just a couple of days ago, just off the campus, very near to the campus at Northwestern. And there was a lot of confusion and of course, worry and all of those things that go along with that for the students. So if I can throw in my little plug to, help with mental health and gun laws, that would be wonderful. Just supporting our kids in that way as well.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Glad to hear from Olivia through Mom, and hope to hear from all of you at our scholarship dinner a week from Monday. And Attorney General Nessel, thank you so much. We have a special presentation for you. One of the cool things we did in 2022 is get a bunch of beach rocks and paint them up with Democratic messages on them and just kind of leave them around town, kind of a subversive approach to getting people to think Democratic. And we've got a good one we want to give to you. And it says BenzieDemocrats.com on the back, and on the front it says, this is what she does, speak up. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Benzie Dems. And I want to say, and if you guys don't know it, I go all around the state of Michigan, obviously. You guys are one of the most active clubs anywhere in the state, and one of the most fun clubs too, I'm going to say. But I think that what you guys have done here in Benzie is nothing short of a miracle. And, I have to say, it's like, for people who think that getting involved and getting active doesn't matter, you showed them otherwise. And you were really just a model for the entire state. And I can tell you, and I was in Detroit as the numbers were all coming in, and obviously some counties took longer to get in, but as things are coming in, I was like, I think that this is wrong. Like, is there a what? I was like, Benzie? They're like, yep, Benzie. And I was like, wow. So, you know what? You show the rest of the state that when you really want to make progress, and I'm not just talking about the things that, for some folks are just a little more controversial. I just mean common sense laws that just help everyone in the state of Michigan. You've taught the state that becoming engaged and becoming activated and getting out there and really spreading our message makes a real difference. You guys were absolutely instrumental in flipping the state blue, and I thank you for it.
Okay. All right. Well, on that very happy note, thank you so much for your kind words. We're going to close the meeting now online, and we're going to mix and mingle now and hit the buffet again and more coffee and whatever. And Attorney General Nessel, thank you so much for being here. And let's all just party together, because that's what Benzie is all about.
Yes. All right.